Hi, my name is John Gomez, and I'm the CEO and founder of Sensato Cybersecurity Solutions. I want to welcome you to this little webcast of ours. Thank you for taking time to listen to my spiel here. And I'm hoping that you walk away with a few tidbits of information, a few nuggets, if you will, of information that can make a vast difference in your cybersecurity strategy. Now, I want to be very upfront with you that this is an educational session, but I am going to talk a little bit about one of the products that we offer. But hey, if you hang in there and hear me out, I think you'll find that it's a good use of your time. Now, before we get started, I do have another confession for you, and that confession is that I am a cyber attacker. I don't view myself as a hacker. I'm not here to play around. I attack things. I break into computer systems and networks and exploit people's psychology and lack of understanding in order to gain a foothold and eventually do damage to systems. Now, thankfully, I've done that in a legal capacity throughout my history, but I think it creates a unique vision in terms of how to defend against people like me and those that are professional attackers. So we're going to use some of that information that I've learned and also share with you some other things as we get through this short but hopefully highly informative and valuable session. So I want to talk a little bit about Sensato, real quick, just to qualify it. We are a cybersecurity firm out of New Jersey. We primarily focus on healthcare cybersecurity, but we've rapidly expanded into other areas of critical infrastructure. We provide everything from risk assessments and pen tests and incident response capabilities and planning and strategy, all the way through to a security operations center and our own software platform known as Nightingale. So I just want to kind of touch on that because we'd love to work with you, but more importantly, I want you to understand that we do bring an expertise to this presentation and a perspective that's a little bit different. If we were to ask me what makes us different, is that we maintain an attacker's perspective in everything we do, in every service and solution and every interaction we have with people. We try to represent the attacker side of the equation. We think by understanding that, it really helps you elevate your defenses and gives you a clarity of what really works and what really doesn't. Speaking of what doesn't work, apparently most things we do don't work. Now, these stats, they're from 2016 and 15, but the sad part is they're still applicable today. So in the 2 years that we've actually collected this data, nothing's really changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Now, I'll leave it to your own devices to read through this, but I think what's more important is to kind of understand, well, while we were investing more money, and we continue to invest more money in cybersecurity year over year, and the cost of attacks have gone up, and the amount of attacks have gone up. In fact, interestingly, there's not been 1 year in the last 30 years or so that we have not had more attacks that are successful attacks than the prior year, even though we've evolved many of our strategies and defenses when it comes to cybersecurity. Pretty mind-boggling. Now, while that's been going on, what we can see is that from the attacker side of the equation, things have gotten better for them. Exploit kits are down in terms of the cost. In fact, today, this data, like I said, is a little dated, but you can get exploit kits today for well under $1,000. Fully functional, really robust, utilizing polymorphism, and we've even heard of some kits, maybe above 1,000, but certainly less than 10,000 that are using machine learning and AI. The cost of attacks have gone down to carry out the actual attack. And if you become targeted, we've gone from a situation where it may take some time for somebody to get in, then about less than 24 hours if you're truly being targeted by a set of sophisticated attackers. So all in all, we're seeing that despite our best efforts, we're kind of still in this situation where, as I like to say, we're solving 2020 problems and challenges with 2010 solutions. So let's talk a little bit more. This number 315 just last year was under 300 days. And several years ago was 5 days. And that's the amount of time, the amount of days before an attacker is actually detected in your network. Now, this is despite having things like intrusion detection and security operations centers. This number is pretty broad across industries. It's a pretty standard number across levels of sophistication and frameworks that have been deployed. So we can do a whole nother series on why that's true, but unfortunately, attackers have been continue to be extremely successful at what they do and what they carry out. So a question I usually get from people is, well, what about all this? We've invested a tremendous amount of money from the boardroom to the basement in attempting to protect our organizations, including things like antivirus and behavioral analysis, endpoint protection, intrusion detection and prevention systems, firewalls, risk and security assessments, and SIEMs. And we're even investing now in tools that utilize machine learning and artificial intelligence to get around things. Now, I can tell you as an attacker, none of these things really scare us. I mean, most of these things are signature-based. There's an attack that took place a few months ago, this past spring in 2018, that when the malware was deployed, it actually generated a unique string of characters, a 32-bit character string, which was then re-ingested back into the actual executable file. Now, the reason that's important is because what is that doing? What's the attacker doing when they do that? Well, they're changing the signature on the fly. So if you're using signature-based systems, which most systems we have today are signature-based, then you're actually changing the signature on the fly, and that creates a whole new challenge to signature-based systems. But the biggest challenge is that for a signature-based system to work, it needs to understand the signature. And in most cases, this concept of signature-based security is vastly flawed. And it doesn't mean that it didn't work at one point, but as I said earlier, it just isn't keeping up with the times. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be doing this. And you know, I don't want you to take away from this that, oh, well, let's just get rid of all this stuff. No, you need it. These things do detect a vast majority of the attacks and a vast majority of the tactics that are out there. But yet, there is a very large contingent of attackers that don't see these things as challenges. They know how to get around signatures. And there's a lot of reasons for that. For one reason, we can get all the same tools that you get. There's nothing that stops an attacker from downloading trial versions of any of the tools that you have, or in some cases, creating legitimate organizations that buy these tools and then reverse engineer them. And that's just reality. That's the audacity of the attacker. And if we don't respect that audacity, we kind of have a very perverted view of what actually is possible. So when I've done this talk in front of organizations and other presentations, somebody will raise their hand and say, well, what about machine learning? Now, I think machine learning is getting better, but let's be honest. Machine learning under the covers, and I don't care if you're using TensorFlow or something else, is ultimately pattern matching. And what we do is we try to establish a set of patterns when we're using machine learning in cybersecurity to hopefully identify what is normal versus abnormal. Now, those things are really good, but here's something about attackers that we got to keep in mind. They don't typically have timelines. They're not up against a quarterly close or end of month or year end. In fact, they don't really operate in that manner. So they can, over time, define what a new normal is. If they've gotten into your network and their initial activity has not tripped anything, and the machine learning hasn't spotted them off the get-go, let's say they've acquired privileges, right? They've got some user credentials. Well, in that situation, they're operating under the cover of a typical user. As long as they mimic that typical user and little by little change that user's behavior over time, they'll establish a new normal. The machine learning will adjust and believe that that new normal is normal, and thereby you've defeated the tactics. Now, I'm not going to say that this always works, that every tool out there falls prey to this, but what I want you to understand is that attackers are actively investigating the tools that you have and finding ways around them. And in many cases, that if they're sophisticated enough, then a lot of these tools just don't work. And it contributes to the reason that we see these high amount of days, right? Back in the early 2000s, within 5 days, you could detect that somebody was in your network. Today, we just saw is over 300 days. A lot of this is because I think that networks have become much, much more complicated. And the noise and the information that we can hide in as attackers has become much, much more voluminous. So it gives us the opportunity to really carry out our nefarious activity without being detected. And we've already spent some time on pattern matching systems. So the one thing all these have in common is that I would consider these to be extremely high-tech solutions. And when we have high-tech solutions, it takes time for them to really work and be able to catch things. Again, I don't want anyone to take away from this presentation that, you know, you shouldn't be doing this. You should have these things. You should deploy them. They are going to make a difference. But you need to be thinking about, what is my last line of defense? What happens if all of this fails? What if I am the one that attracts that one advanced attacker that understands how to get past signatures, that understands how to get past and renormalize machine learning? Okay, then you've got yourself a problem. And as cybersecurity defenders, we need to be thinking about that use case, that edge case, and speaking about and thinking and strategizing, how do I defeat the edge case? We can't afford to take an 80-20 kind of approach to cybersecurity, especially if you work and live in the realm that we do as a company, as Sensado, which is in the area of critical infrastructure. Because when we fail, lives get impacted. And in some cases, when we fail, lives are actually lost. So we can't allow ourselves to do that. And we've got to think about how to solve for the edge case. So one of the things we did is we started asking ourselves, what scares us? When I go breach a network, what scares us? What scares me as John, as an attacker? And I got to tell you, it's not any of the things you saw on the last page. I'm not really scared that you tell me that you have an IDS, or you've got a security operations center, or you've got antivirus or endpoint, or you're using any of those things. I don't sit there and go, whoa, if you've got that, I'm not going to attempt to break in. I'm going to the next house. This doesn't work like an alarm system in a home. Often we hear that, well, if you have a sign out front that says this house has an alarm, the burglars are going to go to the next house, and hopefully that house doesn't have one. When you become targeted by an attacker, what we're going to do is continue to fingerprint and recon and gather intelligence on you. We're going to look at your job postings to see, well, are you running certain antivirus? What type of qualifications do you need for your network administration staff? Because that's going to tell me about your network. What are you advertising for in your IT security teams? What type of skill set? Because now I'm going to start to fingerprint you without ever touching you. And that helps me to start understanding what I can exploit, what tactics I can utilize, and what procedures I can embrace. So none of that really scares me. It's not going to keep me from attacking you. It may get me caught, but chances are it may not. And if we look at the statistics and the data year over year, the chances of me being successful are really more on my side than yours. So we reached out to about 400 or so different attackers of all different types. Nation state, non-nation state, casual, professional. I don't like using the term black hat and white hat. I think that's kind of silly and dated. So I'll just say we reached out to a variety of attackers, and we continually asked them, what scares you? What is the one thing that if it's on a network you are worried about and can really make a bad day for you as an attacker? And interestingly, I'd say the data shows that about 74% of everybody that we interviewed, I think, is the number, came back and said the one thing that scares them is honeypots, right? Which we were shocked at, but when I thought about it, I said, yeah, you know what? That scares me too. Why? Because this is a low-tech, non-signature, non-behavioral based tool. The honeypot is going to grab an attacker no matter what, because you're not supposed to be interacting with it. So the moment I interact with it, I've given myself away. People that understand the network and understand how it should operate should not be interacting with a honeypot. And if they're deployed covertly inside of a network, now I want you to really understand, when I talk about honeypots, I'm talking about them on your internal network, not external facing, not facing the public facing internet, but rather your internal network. Now, if you sprinkle these things across your network and people don't know they're there, the only ones that know are your IT security team, you really raise the bar on having a source of intelligence to know if somebody's crawling around your network. And this is that last line of defense mentality that I mentioned, whereby if everything else you deployed failed, right, and we can consider those your earlier first line of defense, then hopefully the honeypot becomes the last line. But why does this scare them? What is the tactics that are used in order to make this such a scary thing for an attacker? And why are they scared? They're scared because this thing gives them away. So if we simplify the kill chain that we all hear about to this kind of methodology where the first thing we do is intelligence gathering, then recon, then we infiltrate, then we exploit, and then we exfiltrate, we kind of get a sense why honeypots are scary. If we assume the attacker's gotten through your defenses and they're in your network, they're now on your network, and one of the first things they're going to do is perform reconnaissance. And so that reconnaissance is going to be done in several ways. At the most crude form, it's going to use things like Nmap and possibly some ARPANET and some other things, but they're going to basically probe your network. They want to gather a catalog of what is on your network. In fact, many of the fast-moving attacks that we've seen over the last year, these fast network traversal attacks, have built catalogs of what's on your network. Why? Because we want to understand as an attacker what we're going to go after. Right? We want to know. We don't know what's on your network. Once we're in it, the first thing we're going to do is inventory it. And that's done through reconnaissance. Now, there's some other techniques, whether it's Nmap or others, where we can start inventorying your network. We can use PowerShell scripts and Bash scripts and a whole bunch of other things. Low-level C programs, socket programming. There's a bunch of different things we can do. But the one thing all of those techniques have in common, across the board, without a doubt, is that they have to touch a device. And that is the challenge that scares the attacker. Because if you touch a honeypot, you then are in a position where you've given yourself away. And now you've got to move quickly. And in many cases, you may never even know that you touched a honeypot. Or by the time you realize you have, it's too late. And you either have to exit the network or find some other means of hiding yourself. But somebody, if it's working right and the response is there, they know that somebody's in the network, something occurred. So your best line of defense, your best chance of detecting somebody when everything else has failed is when they begin their reconnaissance. And this is actually great news because it means they still haven't exploited data, they haven't exploited systems, they're just gathering intelligence. And this is when, if they've gotten in, you want to know. Frankly, this is why you've spent so much money on intrusion detection and prevention and firewalls, antivirus and everything else, is because you're basically saying, hey, if somebody's gotten something on my system, I want to know about it. And really, this is their tactic. If they're in your network and they're going to start cataloging and inventorying and figuring out what's on the network, this is when you want to be able to stop them and not let them get any further. So this is why honeypots scare attackers. It's the one thing that we feel, based on what we've learned, universally scares them. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about what we did. We decided, well, if this scares us, then why aren't more people deploying these things? And we found there's a bunch of reasons, right? One is just not understanding that this is something that scares attackers. 2, cost. 3, complexity and reliability, right? If you want to deploy something, you want it to work all the time. You want it to be easy. You don't want to have to go learn a bunch of things and compile scripts. So we decided that we're going to go ahead and build a honeypot platform. And we call that platform Nightingale BDA. BDA stands for Breach Detection Agent. And we see it as a last line of defense that uses the attacker's own tactics against them. Now, I'm going to tell you here right now, there are a lot of open source honeypots that you can go and not purchase, but you can download and use. And we thought about that, but then we decided that, you know what, we want to provide a commercial grade product that works really, really well and can scale and is going to be there for years and years and years to come that you can have faith and trust in. And so I want to talk a little bit, though, about the name. Where did we come up with this name, Nightingale? Well, it just so happens that long ago, in a land far away, well, not if you're in Japan, because this is where the story takes place, samurais were being assassinated by ninjas. True story. And so the samurai had to put out a call to say, we need a way to defeat these ninjas, because despite our best defenses, despite everything we have in place, moats and guards and all kinds of stuff, the ninja are still getting in and getting to us and assassinating us. Sound familiar? You can replace the word samurai with data or patience or lives or whatever we want. And we have the same situation today. Despite our best defenses, the bad guys are getting in. So somebody came out with this concept of a floor that looked like any other floor in the castle. The catch was, if you touched the floor in any way, shape, or form, it would begin to chirp like a nightingale, a bird. And hence was born the Nightingale floor. And we thought that's kind of brilliant and kind of cool. So we named our product Nightingale BDA, because ultimately, despite everything, we want this thing to chirp, to alert you, to let you know somebody has gotten into your castle, despite every other defense you may have. So that's where the name comes from. So this is a quick screenshot on the Nightingale BDA console. Not going to go real deep into it, just want to give you an idea that this is a professional grade, commercial level product that has been meant to really scale and drive out. The way it works is pretty simple. An attacker gets into your network and decides to go poking around and doing their inventory and cataloging your assets before they decide what's their next step, where they're going to pivot and how they're going to escalate their privileges. If you don't have Nightingale BDA or a similar product deployed, they're probably going to move around, and they're going to probably get around your network and be there at this point, possibly several hundred days. So with Nightingale BDA, same scenario, same situation, except this time when they're moving around your network and trying to catalog the assets and what's on there, they bump into Nightingale BDA. If they don't know, but Nightingale is able to alert you, and it can alert you through the console, through email, or through a text message. It's completely configurable, easy to deploy. You can deploy as many of these agents as you want. We sell the typical product with 2 agents, but we can scale up to thousands. So you can kind of sprinkle these things across your network and have them out there covertly waiting. They are pretty self-sufficient in terms of updating themselves and managing their own environments. So not a lot of headache to get them up and running and deployed. So I want to cover a little bit about what did you learn today. First, attackers can bypass most defenses for a variety of reasons. They can defeat signatures. They can defeat configuration, meaning that the product wasn't configured correctly, the IDS or the firewall, something in it wasn't kept up to date, you didn't keep up the firmware, you didn't have the right rules in place, you turned off something that you shouldn't have turned off, you turned on something that you shouldn't have turned on, or behavioral defeats, where the attacker basically is using things like machine learning to reshape a normal that allows them to operate. We found that low-tech solutions provide a really high and stable ROI. Right? Things that basically are very cause and effect, like a honeypot. Touch it, it's going to go off. Doesn't really care about a signature, doesn't care about behavior. It's just going to be very cause and effect. And that should help you have a really good, kind of peace of mind. We also learned that you need to have some form of last line of defense. Now, if you don't think honeypots are the right approach, I would implore you to sit back and think about and answer the question, if everything else I have fails, what now? And that answer should never be like, oh, I guess I'm out of a job. The answer should be, okay, what do I do? Because that's the profession we're in. We're being paid, we're being trusted by our organizations to come up with the right defenses. We present those options. Sometimes we can afford them, sometimes we can't. But we never start thinking and we never stop fighting. The last thing is that we found attackers do fear honeypots because of the fact that they don't really have a lot they can do to overcome them. The only thing they really can do is not touch them. But it's really hard not to touch them unless you've told people where your honeypots are. So you have to be covert, but if you are, there's a real good chance nobody's going to know. And even insider threats, if somebody goes poking around, they're going to trip the honeypots. They're extremely effective at reducing advanced persistent threats. They reduce the amount of days somebody's in the network without detection. Really powerful tool. We told you about Nightingale Pda. We also mentioned that you can use open source. We think our product and our solution is a vastly much better approach. I don't think that's surprising to you. We've put a lot of time and energy into it, and we've taken everything we know as attackers to make sure that this thing works reliably. It's extremely reliable, and it does act as a last line of defense. The Nightingale Pda is really easy to deploy. You can be up and running within a couple hours at most. It scales extremely well. You can deploy BDA agents across multiple networks, very large-scale environments or very small environments. It's extremely affordable. We currently are at the 1.5 release for our product, and we made the 1.0 product free. So if you really can't afford it, let us know. We'll get you the 1.0 product. The only difference is that the 1.0 product we don't maintain and we don't provide support for, but it fully works, functional, really great foundation. The 1.5 product is where we're putting all of our effort and energy and research into to continue evolving. So if you are part of our Nightingale Pda community, you'll continue to reap the benefits as we continue to evolve the platform. And we have some amazing plans for our Nightingale platform. And ultimately, Nightingale Pda uses an attacker's own tactics against them. And this is extremely important. We're not using signatures. We're not using behavioral analysis. We're taking everything we know as attackers and saying, what are we scared of? And then taking that and using it to catch ourselves. So I think it's an interesting proposition. To get in touch with us, please email us at info@sensato.co. We'd love to tell you more about what we're doing with Nightingale Pda, schedule a demo, give you a trial version, or give you the free version. We'd also love to talk to you about some of the other things we're doing and some of the other services we provide. You can learn about all of that at our website, www.sensato.co. I want to thank you so much for taking this time. I hope you learned a few valuable lessons. And whether you decide to work with us or not, my ultimate goal is that you're a little bit more aware of what's going on and that you start thinking a little more about some of these tactics and how you can embrace them in your own organization. Truly appreciate your feedback. If you get a chance, please share this video. Most of all, we'd love to get to know you better. Never hurts to reach out and say hi. We'd love to make new friends all the time. I think you'll find that we're a little bit different when it comes to cybersecurity, and I think right now, in the world we live in, different's kind of good.